Nick is celebrating his 5th wedding anniversary on July 5th. Early that morning, he is seen standing quietly outside his house, lost in his own thoughts. Later that day, he heads to the bar he owns with his younger sister, Margot. Even though the day has barely started, Nick already looks deeply troubled. Margot asks what is wrong, but Nick only says that he is having a terrible day. He explains that today marks his 5th wedding anniversary. Every year, his wife creates a treasure hunt for him, and every single year, Nick fails to solve the clues, making it feel like he never truly understood his own wife. At that same moment, the phone inside the bar suddenly rings. It is one of Nick's neighbors, telling him something urgent and asking him to come home immediately. As soon as Nick arrives, he notices his cat wandering outside. The front door is also wide open. He rushes inside and starts calling for his wife, but there is no answer anywhere in the house. Then he notices something even more disturbing. The living room table is shattered, as if some kind of struggle took place there. Realizing something is seriously wrong, Nick immediately calls the police. The lead investigator is a woman named Bonnie. Nick fears that his wife may have been abducted, and he tells Bonnie that he does not want to waste any time. He explains that he and his wife moved here 2 years ago after previously living in New York. Both of them are writers. Bonnie begins searching the house. She checks Nick's bedroom first, but nothing seems unusual there. Then she notices an iron that is still turned on, almost as if Amy had left in the middle of doing something. In the kitchen, Bonnie spots what looks like blood on one of the cabinets. After that, they move into the study, where Bonnie finds Amy's Harvard diploma. That alone tells her Amy is far from ordinary. Then she notices a poster for a novel called Amazing Amy. Amy is not just Nick's wife. She is also a successful and well-known author. Not long after, Nick is brought to the police station. In cases like this, the husband is always one of the first suspects. Bonnie explains that kidnapping cases are not always treated seriously, but with crime rates rising lately, this investigation will be handled differently. Since Nick's house is now an active crime scene, he is told he cannot return home that night. Before anything else, Bonnie wants to question him. Nick is informed that he can request a lawyer, but he says he has nothing to hide and agrees to continue without one. During the interrogation, Nick explains that he now works as a university professor teaching creative writing. Bonnie asks if Amy has been acting differently lately, but Nick says everything seemed normal. He explains that this is a very small town. There is barely anything to do here, and even the local mall has already gone bankrupt. Amy never really made friends here either, especially since they only moved 2 years ago to help take care of Nick's mother, who was battling cancer. Nick even suggests that Bonnie look into the homeless population, since that has recently become a serious problem in town. Bonnie then asks Nick to walk her through his day. Nick says that around 9:30 that morning, he went to the beach to read the newspaper. Then around 11, he went to his bar until his neighbor called and told him his cat was outside. Bonnie suddenly asks what Amy's blood type is. Nick has no idea. He also admits that he has not informed Amy's parents yet, claiming he could not get a signal earlier. Bonnie tells him to call them immediately. Using a police phone, Nick finally contacts his in-laws. At that same moment, Nick notices his father being brought in by the police. His father had wandered away from his nursing home and became disoriented. Because he suffers from dementia, leaving him alone is extremely dangerous. Later, Nick personally takes his father back to the nursing home. Since he is still not allowed to return home, he spends the night at Margot's house. That evening, Nick tells Margot that the police still have no real leads. Margot was never particularly close to Amy, but that does not mean she wants anything bad to happen to her sister-in-law. Meanwhile, Detective Boney returns to Nick's house to continue searching for evidence. A woman named Noelle approaches and introduces herself as Amy's friend. She says she wants to talk, but Boney is busy handling the investigation. The forensic team has already finished their initial search, and Boney begins reviewing what they found. There really was blood inside the kitchen. However, the stain was found unusually high on the cabinet. Boney also learns something interesting. The house is under Amy's name. Nick's car is also under Amy's name. Even the credit cards and phone bills are all registered to Amy. Then inside a closet, Boney discovers an envelope labeled Clue Number 1. The next day, Nick returns to the station with Margot. Amy's parents have already arrived, and they are clearly worried. Amy's mother immediately lashes out at Nick. She reminds him that they never approved of Amy moving here 2 years ago. Nick is there because the police are organizing a press conference. Standing in front of cameras, Nick tells the media that Amy has been missing since yesterday, and no one knows where she is. He asks anyone with information to come forward. Then one reporter suddenly asks if there were signs of an affair. Nick refuses to answer. Instead, he is asked to smile for the cameras so the photo can make the headlines. After the press conference, the interrogation continues with Amy's parents. Amy's mother explains that Amy has always been well known and has had many admirers. One of her ex-boyfriends even tried to take his own life after Amy broke up with him in high school. She also mentions another former boyfriend from 8 years ago, whose story also ended badly. Nick looks surprised, clearly hearing these stories for the first time. But Amy's father refuses to give more details. At this point, they are simply exploring possible suspects. Unfortunately, all of those relationships happen years ago, and there are no fresh leads. Once the interview ends, Bonnie calls Nick back into her office. She places the envelope she found on the table. Nick immediately recognizes it. Every anniversary, Amy creates a treasure hunt, and this is always how it starts. Nick opens the envelope and reads the message aloud. Though this place may feel too small, it is still a cozy room for my favorite writer. Nick immediately understands what Amy means. She is talking about his office at the university. When they arrive there, they find another envelope waiting for them. This time, the clue reads, "Hello, handsome. Let's play pretend. You be the spy, and I'll be the lover. Let's visit the little brown house and play husband and wife completely in love." As Bonnie examines the area, she finds a piece of revealing clothing. The detectives believe it may belong to Amy, so Bonnie takes it as evidence. Then she looks at Nick and asks a simple question. Where is the little brown house? And once again, Nick has no answer. That night, Nick visits his father's house, which now sits completely empty since his father lives in a nursing home. As soon as he walks inside, he turns off the alarm system. But something goes wrong, and the system automatically contacts the police to confirm that everything is okay. While checking the house, Nick discovers another envelope. This one is labeled Clue Number 3. That changes everything. It means Nick lied to Detective Boney when he claimed he had no idea where Amy's little brown house was. Not long after, Boney suddenly shows up outside. She followed him. Nick quickly explains that this is his father's house, and he comes here from time to time just to make sure everything stays in good condition. Boney studies the house for a moment before making an interesting observation. At first, she thought this might be the little brown house Amy mentioned, but after looking closer, she points out that the house is actually blue. Later that night, Nick returns to Margot's house and finally opens the third clue. Inside, Amy's message reads, "Imagine I'm a very naughty girl. I needed punishment, and now I've been punished. It's where you keep something for our 5th anniversary. So open the door and hurry." The next morning marks the 2nd day since Amy disappeared. Inside a hotel lobby, dozens of volunteers have gathered to help with the search. Nick greets everyone as they arrive before walking over to Detective Boney. Boney brings up a woman named Noelle, who claims to be Amy's close friend, but Nick says he has no idea who Noelle is. A short time later, Nick steps outside the building. A woman approaches him, tries to comfort him, and asks if they can take a photo together. Without thinking, Nick smiles. The second it happens, he realizes he just made a huge mistake. He immediately asks the woman to delete the picture. She refuses. Later during the search, Nick runs into Amy's mother, who is clearly upset with him. She thinks he has been acting far too friendly around everyone. Nick explains that he is simply being polite to the people volunteering to help. The search continues all day, but no one finds anything. Meanwhile, Detective Boney keeps digging through Nick's house. As she reviews Amy's credit card history, she notices something strange. There are records showing expensive purchases, but none of those items are actually inside the house. One charge stands out immediately, a 65-inch television, but there is no television that size anywhere in the home. While Boney continues investigating, Noelle appears once again and insists that she needs to talk. This time, Boney is too busy and asks another officer to remove her. That night, Amy's disappearance becomes one of the biggest stories on local television. Nick still cannot return home, so he spends another night at Margot's place. Margot asks him a serious question. Has he really told her everything? Nick immediately says yes, but Margot remembers how he acted the morning Amy disappeared. Before anyone even knew Amy was missing, Nick already looked miserable at the bar. Nick quietly admits that his life has been falling apart for a long time. Not long after, Margot heads upstairs to sleep. A few minutes later, Nick receives a text message from someone waiting outside. He walks to the front yard, but no one is there. Then he hears something coming from the backyard. When he goes to check, he finds a woman named Andy. She is Nick's affair partner. Nick immediately tells her that meeting here is a terrible idea, but Andy says she misses him. Nick tries to push her away, but in the end, he gives in to temptation. Even with Margot sleeping inside the house, Nick still chooses to be with Andy. Now, for the first time, we begin to understand who Amy really is. Years earlier, Nick and Amy were living in New York, but after Nick's mother was diagnosed with aggressive cancer, he decided they needed to move away. Amy never objected to leaving. Still, she wished Nick had at least asked how she felt about it. They moved to take care of his mother, but in the end, his mother still passed away. After that, Nick had no plans to return to New York, so Amy sold her house there. The money from that sale was later used to buy the bar that Nick and Margot now run together, even though the business barely makes money in this small town. As time passed, Amy slowly began feeling that something inside their marriage was changing. Nick spent more and more time leaving the house alone, and Amy was left sitting in silence. One night, before leaving again, Amy asks him a serious question. What if one day they have children? Nick immediately says this is the worst possible time. They are already struggling financially, and he refuses to use children to fix a broken marriage. The argument quickly becomes personal. Amy calls him a coward for walking away in the middle of a fight. Amy tries to stop him from leaving. Instead, Nick suddenly shoves her. And for the first time in her life, Amy realizes she is actually afraid of her own husband. Nick regrets it almost instantly, but Amy no longer trusts him. She starts feeling unsafe, even considering buying a gun, though she never follows through. At the same time, another thought begins haunting her. Nick acts like he wants her gone, but he never asks for a divorce. And Amy knows exactly why. The bar, the house, the credit cards, everything is legally under her name. If they separate, Nick could lose all of it. Amy could always go back to New York, but doing that would mean telling her parents the truth about her marriage. And even Amy is no longer sure what Nick is truly capable of. Back in the present, Detective Boney visits the abandoned shopping mall. Since the place was never demolished, it has become a hideout for homeless people and drug users. Boney is not there to arrest anyone. She is looking for answers. Eventually, she speaks with a dealer and asks if he has ever seen Amy. The man remembers her immediately. He says women like Amy rarely come to places like this. Then he reveals something unexpected. Amy was not there looking for drugs. She was trying to buy a gun. Boney looks completely confused. The dealer says he turned her down because he does not sell weapons. But one detail still sticks with him. Amy was wearing all pink that day, and he remembers it clearly because it was Valentine's Day. The next morning, Nick and Andy wake up together. Nick immediately tells her to leave before Margot wakes up, but it is already too late. Margot has seen everything. In that moment, she realizes her brother is not only a liar, he is also a cheater. Nick finally admits the truth. He and Andy have been seeing each other for a year and a half. Andy is one of his students. She is only 20 years old. Nick tries defending himself by saying his marriage with Amy has been falling apart for years, but even he knows that changes nothing. If people ever learn about the affair, they will immediately connect it to Amy's disappearance. And suddenly, another possibility becomes terrifyingly clear. The underwear Boney found in Nick's office may not belong to Amy at all. It may belong to Andy. Margot looks at Nick and quietly tells him something painful. At first, she was worried about him, but now she is actually afraid of him. That same night, Nick is supposed to give another public statement about Amy's disappearance, and yet just hours earlier, he was secretly with another woman. Margot turns on the television and shows him what people are already saying. The media has started tearing him apart. One talk show host is now speaking with a lawyer named Tanner. Tanner Bolt says he is willing to defend Nick because no one has proven he is guilty, but the host sees things differently. To him, Nick does not look innocent. He looks like a sociopath who cannot even fake empathy after his wife disappeared. Now that the investigation inside his house was finished, Nick was finally allowed to return home. But the moment he stepped into the kitchen, something immediately caught his attention. There was a strange white powder scattered across the floor that definitely had not been there before. The kitchen cabinet, the same cabinet where traces of blood had been found earlier, had now been completely cut apart. Even outside the windows, Nick could still see police officers going through his trash like they were searching for something he didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Detective Boney's partner could not understand why Nick still hadn't been arrested. But Boney refused to rush her judgment. She explained that making an arrest without understanding the full story would be a huge mistake. They already knew Amy had tried to buy a gun, but they still had no idea what she had been trying to protect herself from or who. Not long after that, the forensic team finally returned with the lab results. The blood found in Nick's kitchen belonged to Amy. Based on the blood pattern and the amount recovered, forensic experts believed Amy had likely been struck with a blunt object, something like a wooden bat or heavy rod. The impact probably caused her to collapse right there in the kitchen, and judging by the amount of blood, the team seriously doubted she had been able to stand up again. Somewhere else, Nick arrived at another volunteer search event. Cameras were everywhere, and the pressure from the media was becoming impossible to ignore. Standing in front of the crowd, Nick began his speech. He told everyone that his wife had been missing for 3 days. He asked anyone with information to come forward, no matter how small the detail might seem. Then he directly addressed the rumors surrounding him. Nick insisted he had nothing to do with Amy's disappearance. He reminded everyone that he had fully cooperated with the police and had not even hired a lawyer because he believed he had nothing to hide. He also apologized if his behavior in front of cameras made him seem cold or emotionless. Then he asked the media to stop judging people before knowing the truth. But before he could finish, a woman suddenly appeared in the crowd. It was Noelle. She screamed loud enough for everyone to hear. "What did you do to your pregnant wife?" The entire crowd fell silent. Nick froze for a second before ending the speech immediately. But it was already too late. Reporters rushed toward him with endless questions because this was the first time anyone had mentioned that Amy might have been pregnant. Later that day, Detective Boney visited Nick at his house. She asked him directly if he knew Amy was pregnant. Nick denied it without hesitation. He also insisted that Noelle probably didn't know Amy as well as she claimed. But Boney quietly placed several photographs on the table. The pictures showed Amy spending time with Noelle, smiling together like close friends. Nick stared at the photos, completely confused. He admitted he had no idea how close they actually were. Then Boney began explaining why this entire case felt wrong. When she first arrived at the house, she saw the broken coffee table table in the living room. At first, it looked like evidence of a violent struggle, but something about it didn't make sense. Not a single framed photograph nearby had fallen over, and in a real struggle, those pictures should have been knocked down easily. That meant the crime scene may have been staged. Then Boney revealed something even worse. The blood in the kitchen had clearly been cleaned before police arrived, but whoever cleaned it had done a poor job. It looked less like a kidnapping and more like someone trying to hide a murder. She also reminded Nick that he had immediately suggested the police investigate homeless people nearby, almost like he was trying to push the investigation in another direction. According to Noelle, Amy had often talked about problems in her marriage: financial stress, arguments, emotional distance, all the classic warning signs. Then Boney showed him his financial records. Nick had over $100,000 in debt. Even worse, his credit card showed expensive purchases that Nick claimed he had never made. And just a few months earlier, Nick had increased Amy's life insurance policy to $1.2 million. Nick insisted that had been Amy's idea, but Boney wasn't finished. Amy's medical records confirmed something else. She really had been pregnant. For the first time, Nick realized just how deeply he was being trapped. And from that moment on, he refused to answer another question without a lawyer present. Later, Margot came to see him. She looked hurt, but more than that, she looked exhausted. She told Nick she was tired of being lied to. First, he hid the affair. Now he was hiding Amy's pregnancy. Nick quickly tried to explain. He said Amy never wanted children. In fact, when they first moved here, he had been the one who wanted to start a family. Amy was the one who refused. To prove it, Nick showed Margot documents from a fertility clinic. The papers proved he had once seriously tried to have children, but Amy had rejected the idea. Nick admitted that their marriage had already been falling apart. Deep down, he thought maybe having a child could have saved them. Inside the same box, Margot also found letters from a man named Desi, Amy's ex-boyfriend from high school, who apparently had never stopped obsessing over her. Margot looked Nick in the eyes and told him something important. No matter what happened, she would always love him. But if he was hiding something, now was the time to tell her. Nick looked offended. The fact that his own sister could believe he murdered Amy hit harder than anything else. But at this point, every piece of evidence was pointing straight at him. Nick couldn't even leave his house anymore because reporters were camped outside day and night. With nowhere to go and nothing else to do, he decided to focus on Amy's third anniversary clue. After thinking it through, Nick finally solved it. Without wasting another second, he quietly slipped out of the house, carefully avoiding the media waiting outside. The clue led him to another house, and when he opened the garage, his entire body froze. Inside were stacks of brand new items, expensive electronics, furniture, boxes everywhere. Every single item matched the purchases made using the credit cards Nick swore he had never used. At the same time, Detective Boney returned to Nick's father's house. She still hadn't forgotten that Nick had secretly visited this place at night. Her partner once again suggested arresting Nick immediately, but Boney knew one thing: murder cases without a body were always dangerous. So she kept searching. Then she noticed something strange. An incinerator door had been left slightly open. When she looked inside, she found a half-burned book. It was Amy's diary, and according to the entries inside, Amy had started writing it around the time she first suspected Nick was having an affair. Page after page described fear. Fear that Nick was changing, fear that he was becoming violent, and eventually, fear that one day, Nick might actually kill her. But then the truth finally came out. Everything changes here, because on the day Amy supposedly disappeared, Amy never disappeared at all. She was alive, and every single thing that happened had been part of her plan. Amy had spent months building the perfect trap. Her goal was simple. She wanted Nick to be arrested, tried, and convicted for her murder. This was her revenge, because Amy already knew about the affair, and in her mind, Nick had not just betrayed her. He had stolen her pride, her dignity, her future, and her money. To Amy, that was its own kind of murder. So she created a plan so detailed, almost nobody could see through it. She intentionally became friends with Noelle. She spent enough time with her to make their friendship look real. Then she slowly fed Noelle stories about Nick being angry, abusive, and violent. Amy was also the one who maxed out the credit cards, buying expensive items they never needed. She was the one who convinced Nick to raise her life insurance policy to $1.2 million without reading the documents carefully. Behind Nick's back, Amy kept building connections with more people, making herself look loved and unforgettable. Because when a beloved woman disappears, people demand justice, and if that woman is pregnant, the pressure becomes unbearable. So Amy needed one final piece. She needed to fake the pregnancy. First, she drained the toilet. Then she gave lemons to a pregnant friend, knowing it would make her need to urinate. And when the moment came, Amy collected the urine. Now she had everything she needed to make the lie look real. On the morning she disappeared, Nick had already left for the beach. The moment he was gone, Amy immediately began putting the next phase of her plan into motion. She smashed the furniture in the living room, making it look like a violent struggle had taken place inside the house. But she made sure to leave behind small inconsistencies, just enough for sharp investigators to notice something felt off. She even placed a fallen picture frame back where it belonged, carefully creating the impression that the entire scene had been staged. Then Amy moved on to something far darker. She drained her her own blood. After collecting enough of it, she spilled it across the kitchen floor. Then she cleaned it badly on purpose, making it look like an amateur had tried to hide evidence. Amy even burned a wooden club because she knew investigators might assume she had been attacked with a blunt object. But evidence alone would never be enough. Amy needed a story. That was why she had been writing her diary for so long. Every page mixed truth with carefully crafted lies, slowly painting Nick as a husband who had become angry, unstable, and dangerous. Then Amy partially burned the diary in the fireplace, making it look like Nick had tried to destroy it, but made one careless mistake. Every single part of this plan had one purpose. Amy wanted the entire world to hate Nick. And once Nick had suffered enough, Amy planned to drown herself in a lake. Eventually, police would find her body, and Nick would spend the rest of his life in prison for a murder he never committed. But before any of that could happen, Amy needed to disappear completely. After leaving home, she went into a public restroom. There, she cut her hair and dyed it, changing her appearance so nobody would recognize her. Then she traveled outside the city and rented a cheap motel room for a few days. She never planned to stay long anyway. In just a matter of days, she intended to end everything. She even took a hammer and hit her own face. Because when her body was eventually found, Amy wanted every bruise to tell its own story. Back in the present, Nick rushed to meet Margot. He showed her something that made both of them freeze. The garage where Amy had hidden all the expensive items belonged to Margot. Among the boxes, Nick found another package waiting for him. Attached to it was a note written in Amy's handwriting. "My dear husband, I know you think you move through this world unseen. Don't believe that for a second. I know where you've been, and I know where you're going. For this anniversary, I've planned a special journey. Follow the river, sit back, and relax, because your story is over." The moment Nick finished reading it, his face changed. He immediately understood what Amy meant. Up the river. In American slang, that meant prison. At that moment, Nick and Margot finally understood the truth. Amy wasn't missing. Amy was framing him for murder. Nick finally confessed something he had never told anyone. On the morning Amy disappeared, he had planned to ask for a divorce. Before he could say it, Amy told him to leave for a while and think about their marriage. That was why he went to the beach that morning. By the time he returned, Amy was already gone. A part of Nick hated himself for admitting it, but another part of him felt relieved, because if Amy was alive, at least she was safe. Meanwhile, Amy continued hiding under her new identity. The day after her disappearance, she prepared to leave her motel room when one of the neighbors greeted her. This woman's name was Greta. Since Amy was hiding, she introduced herself as Nancy. Because her plan eventually ended in suicide, Amy had nothing to do except wait for the perfect moment. So she spent her days doing almost nothing. Later, she visited the local library, not to read, but to use the internet. She wanted to see what the world was saying about Nick, and what she saw made her smile. The media was tearing him apart. Every headline painted Nick as Amy's killer, even though her body had not been found. The next day, Amy continued wasting time in her motel room. This time, Greta kept her company. Amy told her that she was from New Orleans, another lie added to the growing list. Greta eventually noticed the bruises on Amy's face. She immediately assumed Amy had been abused. Amy never explained everything directly. Instead, she carefully shaped the story. She told Greta that she followed Nick to his bar, and that was where she saw him with another woman. That was how she supposedly discovered the affair. Later that night, Amy and Greta watched television together, and just as Amy expected, her disappearance had become the hottest story in town. Then Noelle appeared on screen. Amy watched quietly as the woman she had carefully turned into her best friend spoke to reporters. Noelle talked about how kind Amy was, and how terrible Nick had become. Amy returned to her room, feeling completely satisfied. Her plan was working perfectly. Then she picked up the phone, and anonymously called the police. She reported suspicious activity at Margot's house. Back in Nick's world, it was now the fourth day since Amy vanished. Knowing he was running out of time, Nick went to meet the attorney he had seen on television earlier. His name was Tanner. For the first time, Nick told someone everything. He explained how Amy had built an entire murder case around him for a crime that never even happened. Surprisingly, Tanner believed him, and he agreed to help. But there was one problem. Tanner's fee was $100,000. Even so, Nick agreed without hesitation. Tanner explained that their only chance now was to build a counter story, one strong enough to shift public opinion. But turning the public against Amy would not be easy. They needed proof. Then Nick remembered someone from New York, a man named Tommy. Tanner managed to track him down, and soon Nick was sitting face to face with one of Amy's ex-boyfriends. Tommy looked exhausted, like life had already taken everything from him. Nick asked what happened between him and Amy. Tommy explained that Amy once accused him of rape. Because of that accusation, Tommy faced a possible sentence of 30 years, maybe even life in prison. Eventually, Tommy took a plea deal and admitted guilt, even though he claimed he was innocent. Because of that, he was not sent to prison. But for the last 8 years, every job application he submitted forced him to write one word beside his name: rapist. And because of that, no nobody ever hired him. Nick asked what really happened. Tommy explained that they first met at a party. They dated for several months, but eventually he began noticing disturbing behavior. Amy was unpredictable, manipulative, and emotionally dangerous. Instead of breaking up immediately, Tommy decided to slowly create distance between them. But Amy figured it out. One night, Amy bought rope. She asked Tommy to tie her up during sex. Tommy thought it was just fantasy, so he agreed. The next morning, police arrested him. Amy showed officers the rope marks on her wrists. From the police perspective, the evidence looked obvious. Tommy had tied Amy up and raped her. That was the last time he ever saw her. After that meeting, Nick moved on to another name, Desi, Amy's ex-boyfriend from high school, the same man who had been sending Amy letters for years. That was how Nick found his address. When Nick asked why he still wrote to Amy after 20 years, Desi gave him a simple answer. Amy had been his first serious love, and that was all he was willing to say. Desi's house wasn't far from Nick's place, so Nick drove home afterward. But as he passed his bar, something immediately felt wrong. The place was closed, and outside, a crowd had already started gathering. The next morning, Tanner finally arrived in town. He joined Nick and Margot at the house, where Nick made another confession. He believed Amy started all of this because she discovered his affair with Andy. Every clue from the anniversary hunt pointed to places connected to his cheating. His office at the university, his father's house, and finally, Margot's garage. Nick admitted something that made the room go silent. Those were the places where he and Andy used to meet. He never used hotels, because hotels could leave a trail. Margot still could not understand why Amy called it the Brown House, when the place was clearly painted blue. Nick explained that after his parents divorced, he used to imagine his father was a secret agent named Mr. Brown. Amy was the only person he had ever told that story to, which meant she deliberately used it in the clue. Tanner quickly realized that every clue pointed towards something dangerous. The lingerie had been found inside Nick's office. The expensive items purchased with Amy's credit cards were hidden inside Margot's garage. But the question that still mattered most was what Amy had hidden inside Nick's father's house. Nick admitted he had no idea. The only thing discovered there was Amy's diary, but unfortunately Boney had already taken it first. Since the house was now considered an active crime scene, nobody was allowed to enter anymore. Tanner believed they needed to tell the police about Andy immediately. Keeping the affair secret only gave prosecutors a stronger motive to use against Nick. Tanner also warned that Margot could be dragged into the case if she continued hiding information. If the police believed she knew about the evidence in the garage, they could accuse her of helping cover up Amy's murder. Meanwhile, Amy spent the afternoon playing mini-golf with Greta and her boyfriend. At this point, Amy and Nick's timelines had finally caught up, making the story move between both sides more frequently. During the game, Amy accidentally dropped the pouch containing all her money, and Greta immediately noticed how much cash was inside. Greta looked confused because Amy had constantly complained about being broke. Later that night, Amy returned to her room and counted her money again. While doing that, she suddenly heard noises outside. She checked the area carefully, but found nobody there. The next morning, Greta and her boyfriend suddenly barged into Amy's room without warning. They already knew Amy had been hiding money from everyone around her. Greta also figured out that Nancy was not Amy's real name, and the fake hair color proved she was clearly hiding something important. Greta understood Amy would never dare call the police, so they forcefully stole the pouch and took every dollar she had. Then they walked away without leaving Amy any money at all. Somewhere else, Nick and Tanner continued preparing their strategy. Tanner wanted Nick to become bait by agreeing to an exclusive television interview. However, Nick would finally need to admit the affair with Andy because hiding it any longer would destroy him later. Tanner explained that the public would absolutely hate Nick at first, but eventually they might forgive him. A man who openly admitted his mistakes on live television was easier for audiences to sympathize with. Tanner believed the entire case depended on public perception. If people started liking Nick again, they might finally consider the possibility that Amy had framed him. Nick quietly realized there was only one person he truly needed to convince. Back with Amy, she could no longer afford a place to stay and was forced to sleep inside her car. Even then, Amy still refused to panic and decided to contact someone she knew would always come running for her. The following day, she arrived at a casino and met Desi, her former boyfriend. Amy knew Desi would do absolutely anything she asked. She twisted the story completely and claimed she had threatened to leave Nick, which supposedly caused Nick to hunt her down and try to kill her. Amy even lied about losing her pregnancy, and Desi believed every single word without hesitation. He suggested going to the police immediately, but Amy stopped him because the public would turn against her if she suddenly reappeared. Desi instead offered to hide her inside his lake house. While leaving the casino, Amy unexpectedly spotted Andy giving statements to reporters. Andy openly admitted she had been having an affair with Nick, but she also insisted she did not believe Nick was capable of murdering Amy. Elsewhere, Nick continued preparing for the exclusive interview. Tanner carefully coached him about which questions he should answer and which topics he needed to avoid completely. The most important thing was for Nick to stop defending himself and admit he had failed as a husband. Tanner also instructed him to wear the watch Amy once gave him, even though Nick never liked it. Later, Nick met with a journalist connected to Tanner. At the same moment, they learned Andy had already exposed the affair publicly before the interview even aired. Tanner immediately considered canceling everything, but Nick surprisingly wanted to continue. This would not be a controlled interview anymore, and the reporter was expected to attack him aggressively on live television. Even so, Nick claimed he was ready for it. Meanwhile, Amy arrived at Desi's luxurious lake house. Desi was wealthy enough to provide everything Amy could possibly need. The house was already stocked with food, meaning Amy never needed to leave for groceries. Desi also proudly showed her the surveillance cameras installed throughout the property so she would immediately notice any intruder nearby. Of course, Desi was not helping Amy purely out of kindness, but he still promised he would not force himself on her or stay inside the same house. The next day, Amy wandered through the property alone while exploring every room. Around that same time, Desi returned carrying several expensive bags filled with new clothes. He wanted Amy to feel as comfortable and protected as possible while staying there. Meanwhile, Nick sat inside Margot's house preparing to watch his interview once it aired on television. Amy watched the same broadcast beside Desi and immediately noticed Nick was wearing both the watch and tie she had bought him. During the interview, Nick firmly stated that he did not kill Amy. However, he openly admitted the affair with Andy and confessed he deeply regretted it. Nick insisted he genuinely had no idea where Amy was and claimed he had been desperately searching for her because he feared something terrible had happened. He explained that not being a murderer did not automatically make him a good person. Nick admitted he had been a terrible husband to an extraordinary woman. Hearing those words immediately caught Amy's attention. Nick continued talking about the first day he met Amy and how quickly he fell in love with her. Amy had already been a successful and admired writer, while Nick considered himself completely ordinary beside her. Everything Nick said sounded less like a defense and more like a man begging for forgiveness from the woman he destroyed. And for the first time in a long while, Amy started falling in love with Nick again. Desi noticed the change immediately, and jealousy began growing inside him. At the same time, several police officers arrived outside Margot's house. Boney had come to investigate the anonymous call Amy made earlier about suspicious activity inside Margot's garage. Inside, the police discovered all the expensive items purchased using Amy's credit cards. Nick insisted he never bought any of those things, but Boney no longer believed him. The situation became even worse when Margot was taken to the police station under suspicion of helping Nick cover up the crime. Soon afterward, Tanner arrived and warned Nick not to panic yet. The police still had no body and no confirmed murder weapon. As long as Nick refused to confess, Tanner believed they still had a chance to survive this case. Later, Boney sat down with Nick and Tanner while presenting the diary recovered from Nick's father's house. Nick admitted the handwriting definitely belonged to Amy. Every entry started with truthful details before eventually twisting into lies about Nick becoming violent and abusive. Then Boney revealed another piece of evidence, the burned blunt object Amy had carefully planted earlier. Boney officially considered it the murder weapon, and with that, Nick was formally placed under arrest. 2 weeks later, the story reaches the 21st day after Amy disappeared. Desi was now living in the lake house with Amy, although they still slept in separate rooms. Even after everything, Desi continued trying to win Amy's heart completely. Of course, he still had work outside the house and could not stay with her all day. However, before leaving that morning, Amy suddenly kissed him and bit his lip hard enough to make it bleed. Then she deliberately messed up his hair and wrinkled his clothes. Desi looked confused by her behavior, but he eventually left without questioning it further. What Desi failed to realize was that he had already become part of Amy's next plan. After he left, Amy soaked her clothes with wine around her body and near her thighs so it would look like Desi had assaulted her. She also tied a rope around one of her ankles before screaming in areas fully covered by the security cameras. Amy wanted everything to appear as if Desi had been keeping her trapped inside the house, and she had finally managed to escape. Meanwhile, Tanner successfully got Nick released because the police still had no proof directly connecting him to Amy's disappearance. Nick was not truly safe yet, but at least he could now wait for trial comfortably at home instead of sitting inside a jail cell. 8 more days passed, making it the 29th day since Amy vanished. That night, Amy intentionally rubbed the rope against her wrist until it left visible injuries that looked like restraints. She knew this would be the final stage of her performance. As usual, Desi returned home after finishing work. Around him, Amy acted like a loving and submissive woman who completely depended on him. She invited Desi to sleep with her, and naturally Desi became excited immediately. However, Amy had secretly hidden a box cutter nearby. In the middle of the act, Amy suddenly sliced Desi's throat open and covered the room in blood. Desi quickly bled to death, and at that moment Amy officially became a murderer herself. The next morning, Amy finally returned home covered in blood from head to toe. Seeing Amy alive immediately changed the entire case overnight because people now realized Nick had not murdered his wife after all. Nick instantly understood that Amy was still acting, but the media surrounding the house captured endless photographs that made him appear like a loyal husband welcoming his traumatized wife home. Naturally, Amy was rushed to the hospital for examination. Doctors discovered signs of assault and also found semen that most likely belonged to Desi. Desi truly became the perfect victim in Amy's story the moment he trusted her completely. After the medical examination, the police began questioning Amy about everything that happened. Amy claimed that on the morning Nick went to the beach, Desi suddenly appeared and kidnapped her. Since Desi already had a history of obsessively stalking Amy since high school, her story sounded believable to everyone listening. Boney asked Amy about the expensive items hidden inside Margot's garage during the anniversary scavenger hunt. Amy calmly explained that Nick secretly stored things there because he was constantly afraid of disappointing her. Then Amy continued describing how Desi supposedly tied her up like an animal and assaulted her every night inside the lake house. Later, the police informed Nick that Amy killed Desi using a box cutter. Nick immediately questioned how Amy could have grabbed a weapon if she had truly been restrained the entire time. Boney also confronted Amy about the disturbing diary entries she wrote earlier. Amy insisted everything inside the diary was true. Then Boney asked why Amy previously tried purchasing a gun before disappearing. This time, Amy started feeling pressured by the questions, so she abruptly claimed she was exhausted and wanted the interview to end. Since the authorities no longer considered her a suspect, Amy was finally allowed to return home with Nick. Once they were finally alone inside the house, Nick demanded that Amy stop pretending. Amy calmly responded that Nick had become perfect again. The version of Nick she saw during the television interview was the same man she originally fell in love with years ago. Nick admitted he only acted that way because he wanted to lure Amy out of hiding. Amy already knew that, but she also believed it proved Nick understood her better than anyone else ever could. Nick demanded to know what truly happened. Amy agreed to explain everything only if they showered together first, so she could make sure Nick was not secretly recording her confession. Nick reluctantly agreed, but he admitted something else during that conversation. For the first time in his life, Nick was genuinely terrified of his own wife because she had now proven herself capable of murder. Nick wanted a divorce immediately, but leaving Amy now would destroy him publicly because the entire country believed Amy was a victim who survived unimaginable abuse. Nick understood the situation perfectly, but he still promised that eventually he would leave her no matter what happened. That night, Nick refused to even sleep in the same bedroom as Amy. The following morning, Amy's return became the biggest inspirational story in America. Every news station in the country continued covering the miracle reunion nonstop. Amy constantly forced Nick to perform the role of the loving and supportive husband in front of cameras. 5 weeks after Amy's return, Nick was still deeply afraid of her. Even after all that time, reporters continued surrounding the house every single day. At night, Amy still slept separately because Nick refused to share a bed with her anymore. Amy never forced the issue, but the distance between them remained painfully obvious. 2 weeks later, Nick finally started mentally preparing himself to leave Amy for good. Unfortunately, the media obsession surrounding Amy still made that impossible. Then Amy suddenly showed Nick a positive pregnancy test. Nick immediately pointed out that he had not touched Amy for 7 weeks after her return, making the pregnancy impossible. But this time, Amy truly was pregnant. Amy intended to use the baby as the final chain, keeping Nick trapped beside her forever. Nick immediately realized he had lost completely because Amy had already planned every detail far ahead of him. Later, Nick confessed everything to Margot. He admitted that Amy had attacked him at the weakest point imaginable. Nick could not bear the thought of his child growing up hating him. Since he knew he would never win custody against Amy, he realized there was only one way left to protect his future child. Nick would have to stay beside Amy forever, and that is where the story finally comes to an end.